there is a group of gamers, myself included, who's very passionate about physical media, and we prefer, when possible, to buy a physical copy of a game rather than a digital copy. And to me, this always made sense. If they're the same price, if it's a $70 game either way, why not buy the physical copy? And then you have the option to resell it if you would like in the future. And I've done this with, older titles as well. Because, for example, the 3DS, when the Nintendo eShop shuts down, the only way to legally get a copy of a game then becomes to buy a physical copy. But you've seen stories probably about DK Oldies and some of these other online resellers and how supposedly inflated the prices are because people don't think that it's fair to pay that much for an old game. But ultimately, the market will dictate those prices, and people are actively buying games from DK Oldies, whether you think they've been ripped off or not. But I did pick up the Xbox Series S last year, and kind of to my own surprise went into an all digital realm with these games. But I still have, obviously, my older consoles, and those are all disc-based and whatnot. But I have been buying significantly fewer physical games than I had been in past years, even for those older consoles. Not because I don't like the medium, not because I don't want to do it, but because I realize that while everybody says a physical copy of a game is a copy that you truly own forever, whether or not, the server or the store associated with it shuts down, and that whole story is great, but the truth is, it's not the case. You don't own that physical game forever in a functional state. As we saw, with some concerns around the PlayStation 4, there was some issues with the time clock or something that it seems like have been sorted out, where if PSN was to go offline, you wouldn't even be able to play a physical copy of a game. But that's not what I'm talking about in this video. What I want to talk about is the fact that that physical copy of a game will break down, will deteriorate over time, potentially, even if you don't even play it, do any harm to it, and even if you store it relatively properly. And we'll get a better idea of this in another 10 or 20 years as we see things happen with PlayStation 1 titles, because those are going to be the earliest widespread disc games out there. But there is disc rot. It's not probably as big of an issue as people make it out to be, where the discs are just going to deteriorate over time. And that's, in part due to improper storage. But I have bought plenty of PS2, Xbox 360 games, you name it, that have maybe minor level surface scratching that just simply do not read very well in my console. And I mean, this is, again, I'm definitely looking these discs over. It's minor level scratching, and they just don't read. And there'll be so many different copies of physical games. You'll think you're going to get a working copy, and maybe you get partway into the game, it's reading all right, and then it gets frozen, you're locked up, a couple levels in. And oftentimes I think collectors don't take a look at, is this game truly in its entirety playable, because you don't have enough time to figure that out. When you're trying to add a game to your collection, buy it online, somebody's selling it to you online, they can test, that maybe it boots up to the menu, but they're not going to go any further than that. And with the way the disc is read, potentially, it does boot up to the menu, it does boot up to the first level, but it's not going to get further in. So ultimately, what do you need to do? You need to have a way to take your physical games, back them up in a digital manner, basically create your own ROMs. And we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago in my PSP video, where I said the PSP is a very nice console for the fact that you can buy the physical games, and the fact that they're in a plastic case actually seems like it helps them keep from being scratched up in the way other physical games would be, ironically, even though the plastic case is very silly to me, but it's uniquely PSP. You can rip a PSP game very easily straight from the handheld, and you can do this with other systems as well. Otherwise, you can rip them from your computer. You can get a digital ISO file of that disc, or whatever the ROM you're looking for is, have it backed up on your computer on an external hard drive, and then you truly, actually have that game forever. Now, people would argue that you don't need to take those steps. You can just simply get the game in other means without having to truly rip it yourself. And in some ways, ripping it yourself is a little bit more of an involved process than you might want to get into, because it's probably going to require a modded system if you want to rip it from the system. Otherwise, you're doing it on the computer. But no matter what, if you want to play the game in its true sense, you're going to need a modded piece of original hardware. I mean, things like GameCube games, Wii games, they can run on the Wii. PS2 games can run from a hard drive in a PS2, so these backed up games can run on the original hardware. I think this is very important because you take something like a GameCube game, you run it on a USB stick on a Wii, and you're going to get basically the perfect gameplay experience. It's not emulation. It's like as though it's running on real hardware because the Wii is real GameCube hardware. It's not running through Dolphin. You're not going to get the upscaling. You're not going to get the potential, 4K resolution you could get with Dolphin, but you will get a flawless and consistently compatible gameplay experience by running the games on original hardware. So that's one option of what you can do with your ISO files for things like GameCube, PS2, original Xbox, because from that point forward, it becomes a little bit more difficult to emulate. Basically anything, can run a PS1 game these days, but the PS2, yes, there's great emulators out there for it, and the games can even be emulated on something like the Xbox Series S, but there will be outliers. There will be games that don't emulate well, or there will be games that, while you can upscale this game, you maybe can't upscale that game on an emulator, or it just is a little bit buggy with some of the shaders, something like that. So you're not going to get a perfect emulation experience necessarily, depending on what kind of hardware you're using on things like original Xbox, GameCube, PS2, and into the future. The older stuff, I think you can emulate pretty well on basically anything. You don't necessarily have to think about using the original hardware per se, unless it's something with a weird peripheral. But you're going to get a good gameplay experience if you actually own a physical console of a PlayStation 2, original Xbox, or a GameCube/Wii. And those physical consoles can be repaired. You can get parts online. You can find, broken systems that maybe have the parts you need. You can physically repair those systems. But when it comes to the media, when it comes to the games, there's a chance maybe you can resurface a disc and fix it up, but you'd have to find someone with a resurfacer. Are you really going to buy yourself a resurfacer? That's quite an expensive commitment unless you plan on doing a ton of these. So you're probably stuck with a broken dud of a game. That's why I really think if you're into physical media, what you don't want to have necessarily is the physical media itself. You want to have that physical media backed up in a digital format that's now detached from any sort of licensing because you ripped the original disc just straight up as its files, and from there you can repurpose it to have it run on a modded system. You can repurpose it to have it run on an emulator on a different system. It gives you much more flexibility. So I feel like if you really truly want to have a long-term collection that's going to last more than, say 20 years from now, you have to back up these physical games in a digital format. Get it on an external hard drive. If that external hard drive goes to crap, you're going to want to have got it moved to another external hard drive. But once you have it in a digital file, you can keep moving these games from one device to another. And that's how you truly preserve your collection. It's not just simply buying the disc. That's not enough to truly preserve your collection long term. You need to get these in a digital file format. I think that that's something that a lot of people are overlooking when they're building their video game collections. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.